Welcome everyone to the Landscape Professionals virtual training. I hope you like this photo of a beautiful stone pathway through a conservation landscape, because this required training is your pathway to be listed on the Rainscapes contractor list that is on our website and informs the Rainscapes rebate program applicants of names of companies whose employees have taken this training class. We are happy to have you here today. You have two Rainscapes planning specialists that will be taking you through these different topics today. My name is Catherine Bukowski, and I will be starting us off. And my colleague Matt Reese will be going over topics with you as well. These topics will give you a broad overview of why the program exists and how to situate it into federal requirements, what the main green stormwater infrastructure concepts are, program project types and requirements, and a back-end look at the rebate process, with a focus on the requirements for plans, plant lists, and installation details for managing stormwater flow, and then we'll end with some resources and upcoming events. We want to stress that we keep this training short to be respectful of everyone's time, but there is a lot of information to share on our program. So this training is really a broad overview, and we encourage everyone to use the resources on our website to supplement what we cover here today. This slide will help you understand where Rainscapes is situated. In addition to being good for the environment and public health, our main driver for the program is to protect the health of U.S. waters. Federal mandates to protect our waters began in 1948 with the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, but that was significantly reorganized and expanded in 1972 with the Clean Water Act, or the CWA. The Clean Water Act establishes a structure for regulating pollutant discharges into the waters of the United States. As part of the CWA, no one can discharge pollutants into a water of the United States without a NPDES, or a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit program, which outlines specific limits on what can be discharged, as well as monitoring requirements to protect water quality and public health. In 1987, the CWA was expanded even further with the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, or MS4, permit program. MS4 permits authorize cities, counties, or other governmental entities to discharge stormwater collected by their storm sewer systems to waters of the United States, while also regulating pollution levels of the stormwater discharge. The MS4 permit program is delegated to the states to meet the federal requirements. In our state, the Maryland Department of the Environment is the authority that manages stormwater, leading to our storm drains and streams. MDE has encouraged environmental site design for a long time to help meet those requirements. But in 2007, the Maryland Stormwater Act was put into law, which requires that environmental site design, through the use of non-structural best management practices and other better site design techniques, be implemented to the maximum extent possible. Environmental site design is a strategy aimed at maintaining pre-development runoff characteristics and protecting natural resources, and it relies on site design, natural hydrology, and smaller controls to capture and treat runoff. There's an entire detailed chapter on it in the MDE's Maryland Stormwater Design Manual, which is available online if you want to learn more about it. MDE issues MS4 permits to the counties to help meet the state's federal requirements. Montgomery County receives its own MS4 permit, which requires the county to meet specific water quality standards. This permit is renewed every 5 years, so the current one was issued in 2021 and expires in 2026. As the new MS4 permit is issued, DEP reviews and makes changes accordingly to our programs that help meet the permit, such as the Rainscapes program. Montgomery County's MS4 permit authorizes them to prohibit pollutants from entering stormwater and to prevent unauthorized discharges. They must also work on restoring streams with poor water quality by achieving required pollutant reduction and implementing other actions to safeguard water quality. So the county uses stormwater best management practices, many of which are part of the Rainscapes program, to capture, slow down, and treat runoff effectively. A municipal separate storm sewer system, or MS4, is a network of structures like pipes, ditches, and inlets owned by a municipality that collects and transports rainwater or stormwater runoff from developed areas, directly discharging it into local waterways without any treatment at a sewage treatment plant. Essentially, it's a separate system dedicated solely to managing stormwater. distinct from sanitary sewers, which carry wastewater from homes and businesses. This graphic shows an example of different sources of pollution that typically enter a storm sewer system through street inlets in developed areas, such as leaves and grass clippings, dirt from construction sites or erosion, fertilizer applied to lawns or gardens, oil or chemical leaks from vehicles or old equipment, litter, dog poop, and salt and sand used during winter snow management. The DEP's Watershed Restoration Division helps meet the MS4 permit requirements through campaigns like Clean Water Montgomery, which aims to proactively implement steps and programs to reduce stormwater pollution and achieve healthier streams through initiatives like restoring and monitoring streams, cleaning and maintaining storm drains, inspecting stormwater management practices, protecting water quality and wildlife habitat through programs like Rainscapes, and flooding prevention activities. The county's water quality protection charge funds many of these initiatives. The WQPC, or the Water Quality Protection Charge, is calculated based on how much of a property is impervious, and all property owners in Montgomery County pay the WQPC, including businesses, HOAs, and nonprofit organizations. By having stormwater management practices on the property, such as installing a Rainscapes project, property owners are eligible for a credit up to 80% off the charge. Once a project is completed, it will be checked every 3 years to see if it is still compliant with requirements for the property owner to continue receiving that reduction. Within the DEP's Watershed Restoration Division, Rainscapes is part of the Stewardship Division, which manages a range of programs aimed at tackling the different stormwater pollution sources shown in the graphic that we just discussed. So in addition to Rainscapes, which you can see the logo here, these are the logos and materials for some of the other programs, such as Tree Montgomery, Pet Waste Management, and Organic Lawn Care. And there's also a SaltWise program aimed at managing the amount of salt put down that makes its way directly into streams, which is very detrimental to the aquatic life that keeps our streams healthy. And there's also litter reduction programs, like you can sign up for stream cleanings and organize them within your community. All of these programs do outreach to HOAs, the general public, schools, and congregations. Here we have a map of the floodplain for Montgomery County that was done by FEMA. This is basically to stress the importance of the MS4 permitting within Montgomery County. This map shows the number of waterways we have through the county that are all direct and indirect tributaries to the Chesapeake Bay. The photo on the top right shows another Clean Montgomery initiative of a storm drain painting, which helps bring awareness to where our stormwater sewers eventually flow to. This overlay shows that we have 8 major watersheds in the county with multiple sub-watersheds that require management and that produce a lot of stormwater runoff. All this information is basically to provide a foundation for understanding why we have the requirements on our projects that we do, as well as to help you understand that as a contractor, when you work with our program, if you ever feel frustrated by the process, just think of each plan as one piece in this huge puzzle that we're dealing with on the back end. And be proud that working with this program, your designs and planning, when they meet our requirements, are helping the county and the state meet federal requirements to help protect our waters, in addition to beautifying homes and helping homeowners with their personal stormwater problems. Now you hopefully have a better understanding of why each Rainscapes practice has requirements that are designed to meet the county's permit rules and requirements. So the graphic on this slide is showing the green infrastructure approach, and it has a circle around the part of the graphic that says existing infrastructure. Previously, the old approach to stormwater only was the existing infrastructure part circled in red. And the idea behind that approach was basically to efficiently just drain away the stormwater from existing properties through the storm drains and right into rivers and tributaries that we just showed you in the previous slide. The green infrastructure approach that Rainscapes uses helps to try to address stormwater quality and quantity by slowing it down, spreading it out, and soaking it in. And we do this through using a treatment train approach. So the green roofs, porous pavers, conservation landscape, All of these different approaches help with slow down the surface runoff that goes into the streets. And there's different treatments such as putting in bioswales or level spreaders. And these are some of the best management practices for stormwater that we will talk about a little bit later in this presentation. Before all the water flows into the drainage system. So the overflow from these systems will continue to go into the sewer system, but they've had a chance to soak into the ground more. We've been slowing it down and giving it that chance to soak in, which also helps to get some of the pollutants out of it as well. So the benefits are increased infiltration, that the treatment area is increased throughout properties, and the discharge volume is reduced. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about some examples of why we have a need for these stormwater regulations that we're talking about. Given the number of watersheds and tributaries you saw in the floodplain map a few slides ago, you can understand um, that there are a lot of properties in our county that are dealing with major stormwater issues. So now we want to show you some examples of what we are dealing with and why these requirements are so important on the ground, especially in residential areas. This slide has an aerial image of a drainage map from the property owned by the organization Nature Forward, previously the Audubon Natural Society, on their Woodin Nature Sanctuary, and where runoff from their property is entering a residential neighborhood. So you can, this is, I want to note too that this is prior to all the stormwater management practices they have more recently put into place. So if you haven't visited this property before, um, it's in Kensington, Chevy Chase area, right around the border of there. It's a really great property to go and see some major stormwater management practices in place that can be replicated on a smaller scale on residential properties. They did a lot of stream restoration. They've installed check dams. There are now a couple different rain gardens on site, permeable pavers. So it's a really great location to go check out for some of these practices. We will go into drainage maps in more detail later on, but for now, the lighter the color on the map, such as the light green, the lighter the amount of water flow. As the line gets darker, such as the dark blue, the heavier the stormwater flow, and typically the velocity if it's a sloped area. So to note on this particular slide, the area here where the water is flowing into this residential lot, we are now going to see a video of what this flow might look like during a very heavy stormwater event. And you can almost actually see the line that we'll be taking another look at in the next video. This video is now showing us an example of the type of stormwater issues we are seeing during a major storm event these days. The quantity and velocity of this water flowing between the houses is essentially a small river and will carry any debris or pollutants with it right into the stormwater sewer system and into our local waterways. Well, this is extreme and was after an intense rain of, I believe, about 4 inches in less than an hour. It is not atypical from what we see around the county, and it really highlights the need for regulating stormwater. This water is actually flowing through a Rainscapes installation in the backyard of the house that was on the right, where we saw the blue line of stormwater entering from the Woodin Nature Sanctuary. Okay, now this video is going to pick up from where the other one left off. And this video is going to show you where that water you saw in the last video flowing into the front yard comes from in the backyard, which is it's passing through a Rainscapes installation. This highlights that Rainscapes have their limitations and shows why we prefer the treatment train approach, where there are multiple practices put into place on one property and even throughout a neighborhood or adjacent properties. Well, this is effectively channeling the water away from the house. The dry creek bed that was installed does not have any check dams, which would have helped to slow down the velocity of this flow and given it more of an opportunity to spread out and soak in. We'll be going into more detail later about the need for check dams and other best management practices when installing rainscapes for reasons like this one to plan for the most intense rain events. These heavy water flows and intense storm events have multiple impacts on homes. They can lead to soil erosion, like the photo on the left is showing on the slope section of that yard. They can cause homeowners issues with water entering basements or causing issues with foundations, and people turn to solutions like the top right photo of building up a wall, essentially with sandbags, just to keep water away from the home. Or situations like the one in the bottom right, where the property above the retaining wall was a sloped forested piece of property that was not being managed well. And you can see the amount of soil and silt that washed into this driveway after another heavy storm event. It's up to the tires of the vehicle, making it difficult for the homeowner to be able to even move or leave the car, leave with the car. Additionally, all of this silt and soil is being carried into our local waterways, which was shown with how much brown water was in that last video that we watched. It's carrying a lot of soil and silt. Here we have some of the impacts that illustrate at least these 4 different photos, and there's plenty of others, the stormwater impacts that are downstream from properties as well. The top left and right photos show exposed pipes along our streamways. And as I mentioned in the beginning, our sanitary sewer system is separate from our stormwater sewer system. So the sanitary pipes are typically located near waterways, and over time, as the stormwater discharges with force into these waterways, heavy erosion along the banks, such as what is shown in the bottom left photo, causes the stream banks to recede drastically, and it can expose the infrastructure that can have an impact on its structural integrity and cause even more problems. It also causes unsafe conditions when roadways or driveways erode, such as the bottom right photo, as shown. Because of all these reasons, Montgomery County has had one of the most aggressive programs in the country to meet MS4 requirements, and the Rainscapes program has been largely successful since its initiation in 2007. To date, there have been rebates administered to a little over 1,800 projects covering close to 24 acres of land with various green infrastructure, as shown in this bar chart to the left. Conservation landscapes have been our most popular practice, and we'll go over later in the presentation why that is, and it's usually due to their ability to be placed in various locations on a property, whereas some of the other project types are more restrictive. Once we started training contractors about the practices, we have had a positive relationship with close to 70% of projects being installed by contractors. While we have multiple DIY resources available, applicants often get overwhelmed with designing, planning, and installing a project and turn to contractors to help them with the process and the transformation of their property. While 24 acres seems like a small amount, this map of the county with an overlay of where our different projects have been installed helps provide a more visual representation of how many different projects there have been and where they are concentrated within those 8 watersheds that we discussed earlier. So we feel that we are definitely having an impact, and we want to continue to work with contractors to get as much of this county map covered as we can within our financial budget each year. In 2024, we had another banner year with 120 paid projects, and by far, conservation landscapes are clearly the favorite, as shown in this bar chart from last year. You'll notice that the tree canopy is no longer in this bar chart. That was part of the program early on, and we no longer have that with Rainscapes, but there is now the separate program of Tree Montgomery that I mentioned earlier, where homeowners can request free trees through that will be installed by the county. You will also note that last year, 76% of our projects were installed by contractors. So we really value being able to offer this training to you and continuing to work on projects together that meet our requirements. We also know that contractors have a high interest in understanding our requirements to speed the process along of design work, as well as knowing more about best practices they can include in their designs. So in some years, we also, when we see an increase in contractor installed projects like this, we will also offer the more thorough site assessment in-person training as well. Before we end this section and move into the Rainscapes rebate project requirements and process, I want to take a minute to summarize and reiterate the green stormwater infrastructure concepts that are key to our program. The main goal is to manage water on site rather than quickly whisk it away from a property as the old approach did. And we do that in numerous ways, but as this photo shows, one of the most popular ways is a conservation landscape with multiple layers of species planted in close proximity to each other. We manage water on site through these three core concepts of green infrastructure, illustrated by the photos of a conservation landscape in a tiered system in the top right photo, which will slow down water and gives it space and time to infiltrate into the ground. And this helps with core concept number one of using healthy soils and native plants for their benefits. This approach can increase organic matter, which increases infiltration rates. And the native plant roots tend to grow deep and open up soil drainage structure. Core concept number two, it is a decentralized, small-scale design approach that slows stormwater down, spreads it out, and lets it soak in. The bottom left photo shows a driveway with permeable pavers, and the bottom right shows a cistern catching water off the roof. And these are all parts of core concept number three, which is the treatment train approach, lengthening the flow path and using multiple practices together to manage stormwater.
Hi, my name is Matt Reese. I am a planner with the Rainscapes team here in Montgomery County. The crux of the Rainscapes Rewards program is that we provide rebates and money back for installing environmentally friendly green infrastructure projects on private property. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the individual rebate project types and some of the requirements needed in order to receive those rebates. So here's a little graphic that shows all the 6 different types of rebates that you can be eligible for. These are all scientifically proven methods of green infrastructure that reduce stormwater runoff in environmentally friendly ways. So we offer rebates for pavement removal, permeable pavement retrofits, green roofs, water harvesting, rain gardens, and conservation landscapes. And we'll start off with rain gardens, which is part of a larger stormwater garden umbrella that also includes conservation landscapes. Between these two, these are by and large, our most common rebate project. Most people end up applying with a rain garden because it's a buzzword that people know, they're excited about, they want to be a part of this large program in this movement to catch stormwater. And what rain gardens are is it's usually a depression in the ground that fills up and holds runoff, whether it's from some sort of impervious surface, whether it's from a roof, whether it's from a driveway, but it is a finite amount of impervious surface that's draining into this garden. And the reason that it's finite is because the size of a rain garden has to be specifically calculated based on the amount of runoff that's coming into it. It is sized for at least 1.2 inch of rainfall to fall on that impervious surface, but we prefer for rain gardens to be sized up to 2.3 inches to be able to handle 2.3 inches of runoff. We have a minimum size requirement of 75 square feet for a rain garden, and we offer $10 per square foot rebate. A additional piece of rain gardens is that the location of the rain garden has to pass a perk test. A perk test is when you dig into the ground and fill it with water and see how long it takes for this location to drain. The reason that we do this is because if it takes longer than 36 hours for the location to drain, that means that the soil is not, it's probably very clay heavy and it doesn't drain quickly, and that would create standing water at the site of the rain garden. We don't want standing water for too long, for more than 36 hours, because that can kill plants that are in the rain garden and it can attract pests like mosquitoes. Conservation landscapes are the other type of project. They are applicable to a wide variety of landscapes, while rain gardens are usually they can only be applied to a certain smaller amount of locations that have a specific impervious surface that's draining into them. Conservation landscapes can take from a wide variety of impervious surfaces. They can take from an unspecified amount. So a lot of times in Montgomery County, we'll see a lot of lot-to-lot drainage that comes from one to the next to the next to the next because it's so heavily suburbanized and urbanized. And conservation landscapes are really good at taking on water from a lot of different spaces because they're not specifically holding just that water. They are slowing down the flow with native plants and other systems like berms and small check dams to allow the water to slow down, to infiltrate a little bit, but more than that, it is just allowing the water to pass through this native barrier to help filter, to slow, to clean, and to allow some infiltration. We offer $5 per square foot rebate for normal conservation landscapes. And then if you choose to do a 3-inch ponding conservation landscape, which is kind of a cross between a rain garden and a conservation landscape, we offer a $6 rebate. These have a minimum of 250 square feet, and they must replace either turf, so just grass, eroded soils, or invasive species. And both rain gardens and conservation landscapes must have 75% native plant coverage in both coverage and quantity of plants. Another rebate that we do is green roofs. These are pretty uncommon because they're pretty complex. They always need to have an engineer involved because what a green roof is you are putting basically an extra piece and a lot of weight on top of a roof that will grow different plants. It has growing media and it holds water on top of a roof. This has a lot of benefits for energy efficiency and also for stormwater management. But again, they are complex, and the biggest piece here for a green roof is that it must be voluntarily constructed. We can build green roofs on older properties that are being retrofitted. We can build green roofs on newer properties that are just being built, but the green roof must not be mandated by an engineer or an architect. It must be voluntary in order to qualify for a rebate. These have to be 250 square feet minimum, and we offer a $9 per square foot rebate. Permeable pavements is probably our runner-up in frequency of projects behind stormwater gardens. Basically what a permeable pavement retrofit is you take a driveway, like in the top right, you can see, and we replace it by taking out the concrete, excavating below it, excavating a basin, and then filling that basin with washed stone and covering up the basin and capping it with these pavers that have little gaps in between them. As rain falls on the paved area, it catches in the basin and it holds and it infiltrates. And we require that an impervious surface like a roof is also draining into this basin. These have a minimum of 100 square feet and they are rebated at $14 a square foot. It is worth noting that these are usually contractor-based projects. It's very challenging to do this DIY. And we require that contractors have a PICP or an ICPI certification, basically a certification stating that they know and they have a portfolio of impervious pavement projects, just because these are quite a bit different than a traditional hardscape, and there are a lot of places that errors can be made. So we make sure that our contractors know how to do this and have done this before. In addition to permeable pavement retrofits, we also do just pavement removal projects. Very straightforward, taking areas that were paved, removing the pavement, decompacting the soil, and either replacing it with turf for $3 a square foot or some sort of stormwater garden for more dollars a square foot, 6 or 7. These would follow the same rules if you go with a garden of 75% native plant coverage. And then the final project type is water harvesting. We offer rebates for both rain barrels and cisterns, both at $1 per gallon. The main difference would be that rain barrel projects are typically smaller. We cap them at 250 gallons or $250 for the rebate. Cisterns up to $500 or 500 gallons. And the reason we have a cap on that is just because it's not really effective to have 20 different rain barrels or cisterns on your own property. It's better to have a few. And we encourage these to drain into other types of projects. So draining into a conservation landscape as an overflow for these, or draining into a rain garden. And so while every project has its rebate value, every property in the county, every property, every parcel has a $7,500, or every single family property, I should say, has a $7,500 maximum for rebates that is allowed on that parcel. That can be made up of one project type, so you can use the entire rebate on a permeable pavement project. That would be $7,500 in rebate on one project, or you can mix and match between them. You can do, maybe judging by the size of a conservation landscape, you can get $5,000 for a conservation landscape. You can have some rain barrels adding to that total, bringing it up. You can have some pavement removal, bringing up the total on that as well. But every single family property has a eternal cap at $7,500. If we also do HOA projects, commercial institutions, and congregations, these different types of properties have a maximum of $2,000 a parcel. That's different than the single family property, just because these are usually larger than a single family property. They may have more impact. And so this has a higher cap of $20,000 per property. Same rules apply. It can be just one type of project, or it can be a mix and match of multiple projects, but every property forever has that lifetime cap. This program applies to most of the parcels and land in the county. It does not apply to parcels and properties within the city of Rockville, the city of Gaithersburg, and the city of Tacoma Park. The town of Rockville and everything is okay, but these census designated city areas have a different tax structure than the rest of the county. And because of this, they don't pay into the pot of money that funds Rainscapes. So they have their own programs, but we just cannot offer rebates in those specific zip codes. But we still encourage you to apply. The first thing that we do is check to make sure that an area is, or that a zip code, or that a project is within an eligible zip code. So if it's not eligible, we would just be able to tell right away. But again, we encourage you to apply because that's just a quick fix. So this table right here is important. It talks about, it kind of breaks down the cost of different types of projects. I want you to focus first on this second to the left gray column, the average cost per square foot or gallon. Just based on the nature of the different projects, they typically have different budgets. Certain projects are a little bit more affordable. Things like water harvesting projects and pavement removal projects are usually relatively affordable, while larger projects like permeable paver retrofits and green roofs tend to be much more expensive. That's just based on the structure of the project. That's kind of how that works. But over on the right column, you can see that Rainscapes rebates cover different amounts based on the project type. So Rainscapes is meant to be a cost share program. It was never intended to fully cover the cost of these private property modifications. It's meant to incentivize environmentally friendly projects on a property. It's meant to encourage people to take these specific changes that can benefit the environment and our watersheds. So typically for water harvesting projects, a rebate can cover 62% on average of the total cost of implementing a rain barrel or a cistern. For a permeable paver project, the rebate typically covers about 33% of the total cost. So this is important to keep in mind, especially if you're a contractor, because a lot of times contractors will use Rainscapes as a way to offset some of the costs for their clients. But it's important to know that it's just doing just that. It's just offsetting a little bit of the cost. It's not covering the entire cost of the project. So something to think about. Okay, it is worth remembering that that was a lot of information about all the different types of projects. And on our website, rainscapes.org, we have descriptions of all of the different project types. And under each project type, it has a link to these requirements, which are very thorough and very specific to each project type, very concise and easy to read. And they'll describe the requirements for every different project type. The rebate amounts, the sizes, the location requirements, just everything that you would need. And I also do need to remind you and talk about how it's really important that we at Rainscapes are able to offer approval before a project is installed. We have a process, which I'll talk about in just a minute, that it's very important that we go through because it is mandated to us by the MS4 permits that Kathy had talked about earlier. We basically have requirements that we have to meet from this that are given to us from the state and from the federal government. And they have stipulated that we have to pass through a certain number of basically the process. And when we are not able to approve an installation, we instead have to do it retroactively. This does not abide by those rules, and so we can't offer a rebate for something that has been installed that we have not been involved in the process getting up to that point. Hello, next slide. So, what is that process? Let's talk about that. The first step, of course, is an application, which is very simple. Again, rainscapes.org. Really encourage you guys to check it out if you haven't looked at it before. We've got a new website. It's very easy to use. It has a link just to hit apply. It'll take you to a checklist, which we'll talk about later in more detail. But you can click the red button that says apply here, and that'll take you to the application, which generally takes about 15 minutes or so. It's really simple. It's very pared down from what it used to be, which is really nice. So the whole timeline from start to finish, first submit the application and then of the required documents, which are usually tax documents, but I believe that we oftentimes find them for the submitter. Then after a couple weeks to a couple months, a Rainscape planner like myself or some of my colleagues will reach out and schedule either an in-person or a virtual visit to the site to understand the lay of the land, hear what the property owner is interested in doing. Once we do that, we will create a preliminary site report or a site assessment, which documents everything that we had chatted about. It'll talk about some of the drainage patterns of the site, what we're looking to do, where we're looking to do it, any problems that we may encounter, any recommendations that we think are important. And then we'll keep that for ourselves. We'll send it to the property owner. And I usually encourage the property owner to send it to the contractor as well, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and we've all kind of looked at the same notes. Then what will happen is the property owner will work with the contractor to create a design for whatever project they're doing, whether that's conservation landscape or a permeable pavement or whatever they end up doing. The contractor will create the design. They'll come up with a final draft and then they'll send it back to the Rainscapes team to make sure that everything aligns with the MS4 permits and the program's regulations so that we can end up offering a rebate at the end. Once we go through that sort of back and forth process, maybe we've said, oh, the basin needs to be a little bit deeper or it needs to be planted a little bit denser. Once we go through that process and everybody's happy, once we offer approval, then the contractor can go forward and finish and do installation. Once installation is completed, we will come out and schedule a final inspection to check and make sure that everything was installed according to the plan that we had agreed upon. We'll take some pictures, we'll take some measurements, and we will finish up the process. Once everything is completed with the final inspection, we'll need to make sure that we have receipts from the contractor, like a stamped invoice that proves that the property owner has paid in full the entire project. This is a rebate. We cannot offer the funds up front. It is rebated after the fact. So once we have those finished receipts and the property owner signs the property owner agreement, we are able to mail the check to the property owner, and that usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks or so. Again, why is it important to follow this process? We need to meet MS4 permit documentation requirements. So we just have to follow the process that is given to us. And we want to make sure that everything moves smoothly. If there are hiccups in the process, that'll cause delays, which nobody wants. And we want to make sure that there's no surprises at the end. Of course, we understand that things, once you get out on site and you start digging or you figure out something may not look just as it did on the plan or something needs to be changed, that's perfectly fine. Keep us in the loop. Just make sure that we're up to date on what's going on. Changes after the approval do jeopardize the rebate. So, of course, if things are changed after what's officially approved, then we may have trouble issuing the rebate. But if we're kept up to date, offer red lines once things are completed. It's a back and forth process. Just keep your planner involved. But do remember that if things change from the original approved plan, that there will have to be some modifications. At Rainscapes, we are always trying to stay on the cutting edge of technology, and one of the most recent changes that we've made and the improvements that we've made is during our final inspection, we have started using these Trimble units you can see in the picture on the right, which is essentially a GIS-based pinpointing system. And as what we did in the past is we used to go out and take photos of a site when it was all completed, and then we would log them into our database in our GIS system, which calculates how much runoff we're intercepting and the total square footage and all of that. And it helps us to provide an accurate rebate for the property owner. But sometimes that can get a little bit challenging with conservation landscapes that are particularly amorphous and there's paths going through them and they're very natural and they follow the contours of the land. So these Trimble units really make it very easy for us to go about and provide an accurate reading, which can provide more accurate rebates as well. They're really cool. They're fun to use. And so now we understand the different rebate types. We understand the process that we have to go through. I'm going to take some time and talk about rain garden conservation, landscape placement, sizing, and plantings. So this video is intended for contractors, and of course, we understand that you probably know a lot of this. This is meant to be more of a refresher and just to kind of just to talk about some of the things that we look for when we go out and work with these projects. So the first stop for assessing a site and assessing a location is looking at the drainage patterns. And at the county, we have a really cool satellite system that has an algorithm that looks at where the computer thinks water will be draining based on impervious surfaces and based on contours and slope. And what that looks like is this image in front of you. It's basically a satellite image with these colored lines, and the lighter lines indicate where the algorithm expects light flow of water, and the darker lines indicate heavier flow that has kind of convened together into a much stronger stream. It's shockingly accurate. It's not perfect, but it's very, very accurate. And so we oftentimes use this as our first stop when looking at a property and thinking about the different types of Rainscapes projects that are available to it. We're happy to provide this to contractors. Just let us know. We'll send you screenshots. We'll send you as much as we can because we find it very useful. So the first step is to find the property, to look at the contours, and then we can start thinking about the types of projects. So just for this example, I'm going to talk about rain gardens and conservation landscapes, our two stormwater gardens. As I had said earlier, rain gardens are, well, first, it's important to identify impervious surfaces. Rain gardens and conservation landscapes have to be placed where they intercept stormwater from an impervious surface, and that can be from a roof, from a deck, from a driveway, from a patio, from anything that does not allow water to pass through it. Rain gardens have to be, again, sized to the specific impervious surface that's draining into them, whether that's 500 square feet of roof or 200 square feet of driveway. They have to be sized, and they're mathematically calculated based on the amount of water that's coming into them. So in the picture on the right, you can see on the bottom, right, there is what looks like a roof that's draining directly into a rain garden. There is really nothing else that is draining into it. That is the best way and the most effective use of a rain garden. Now you can see a lot of times in this county, there's houses right next to each other, and there is flow that comes from one to the next to the next to the next, down through these common spaces or just down through yards in general. And at the bottom left, you can see there's a conservation landscape that is intercepting runoff not only from the house just adjacent to it, but also from a lot of the other houses too. This is a great location for a conservation landscape because they don't hold and stop the water, all of the water. They slow the flow and they clean out anything that's passing through it. So this is a great location. There's a lot more flexibility with conservation landscapes, especially for using them for like heavy overland flow. Rain gardens are a little bit more restrictive. Again, that's why I said earlier, a lot of times people apply with rain gardens and we end up encouraging them to pursue a conservation landscape instead. They both have similar, they do a very similar job. Rain gardens are incredibly effective, but conservation landscapes are effective as well. And they have a lot of other benefits, including biodiversity increase, just a lot of other things. So here's a couple photos of what rain gardens can look like. I like to focus on the top left photo. That's very traditional. That's what it would normally look like. You can see there's a house with a downspout that's probably draining in through an underground pipe or through an overland sort of flow into this basin that's holding water. On the bottom left, you can see that maybe it's more of a it has like a dam that's running from one rain garden to the next to the next. There's a lot of flexibility with design, and that's where our contractors come in and where they can work with the clients to figure out what works best for everybody. So just quickly to run through an example of how the whole process would work. Here's a house. You can see there's just some trails of some flow coming from the house. Looks like it's probably closer to the top of a hill. And this property owner is interested in a rain garden. The first thing we have to do is because rain gardens are more particular, we have to think about the places that a rain garden wouldn't work. On the left side, you can see the slope really starts to fall off. We can't have a rain garden on a slope because there's not enough area for it to hold the water. We also don't want it too close to the house on the left. We try to keep rain gardens over 10 feet from the foundation, just because any water that's infiltrating, we want to keep it far from the house, far from the foundation, far from the basement. We don't want to create any water issues. That is just for rain gardens, and for those ponding gardens. For conservation landscapes, it's okay for them to be up close to the house. On the cul-de-sac side of the house, you see no runoff on the top right. There is no impervious surface that's draining onto this area, so that wouldn't be eligible for a rain garden. And on the right, it's just a little bit too constrained. Not enough space to either get around or to build an effective rain garden. So we're left with these two little places right over here on the left in green. And the property owner ended up choosing to go forward with this area right here. You can see that there is a patio and a piece of roof that's draining directly into the rain garden. You have the size calculations, so they were able to accurately mathematically calculate the size of this. And if you look really closely, there's a berm on the far side that holds the water in place before it starts to fall off that hill. But there is a little bit of an overflow channel, which I believe the next two photos will kind of show you in detail what that looks like. But this is an appropriately located rain garden. So you can kind of see it in this updated aerial photo. There's something there. But then this is what it would look like in person. You can see that the depression is a little hard to see, especially now that it's not holding water, but there's definitely a berm on the left side that's keeping everything in place. And you can see the overflow there with the stones, where once the rain garden fills up, it'll overflow into this, what looks like a conservation landscape down the slope. The stones closest to us is probably where a downspout is piped and drains into the rain garden. Okay, I'm taking my bubble off of the screen because I'm just now realizing that it's been covering content. I really apologize. It's kind of hard to see when I'm doing this recording where the bubble is, but now it's gone, so you can see the whole screen. Hooray. Something else important to talk about with rain gardens is that at the beginning of the process, when you're thinking about a specific location for a rain garden, I had alluded to doing a perk test earlier in the video, and so this goes into a bit more detail on what a perk test actually is. Again, you dig down 2 feet into the soil, and you fill it with water and try and see how long it takes for that water to drain. I would venture to say most places in Montgomery County typically drain within 36 hours. Every now and then you'll find a location that just has really heavy clay soils that do not drain. A lot of times a property owner will know this. They'll be just standing water regularly. Things are just always kind of mucky. But again, we need to check and make sure that the water drains. If it doesn't drain out of the perk test, in time, then that means that the water would just stand in a rain garden, which is not something you want. So we would have to pivot to a conservation landscape, whether that's just a normal conservation landscape or a 3-inch ponding conservation landscape is open to the property owner. A 3-inch ponding conservation landscape just allows a little bit of standing water on top, 3 inches, and that size of a 3-inch ponding conservation landscape would be double what is normally required of a rain garden. And the reason 3 inches is okay is just because it will drain slowly over time. The plants are much more capable of soaking up that amount of water, and especially if it's in the summer, that will evaporate quickly in the heat that we have here. And if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to us. Your contractor or the property owner can perform a perk test. So here are some details that show a rain garden in its entirety, the different pieces of how everything works together. So I'm just going to read this. It must intercept impervious runoff. It can be placed close to the source, but at least 10 feet away from the house. And we do not want to plant within the root zones of large trees because rain gardens have to be excavated. So oftentimes these are better kind of in an open area. Digging down into a very wooded area with large mature trees can disrupt some of the roots, which can destabilize the trees, and that is really not what we want to happen. And they're not best for intercepting large areas of overland flow. That's much better for conservation landscapes. If we look at a cross section here of a rain garden, you can see all those roots growing way down into the soil. These roots help water to infiltrate. Native plants have roots that go way down feet into the soil versus just traditional turf grass, and a lot of ornamentals have very shallow roots. So these basically pull water down into the soil, and then as a plant grows, it has a continual process of roots growing and dying and growing and dying and regrowing and dying again. And these little holes in the dead roots create little passageways through the water through the soil that allow water to drain into it. If the basin fills faster than it absorbs, it should overflow through a spillway onto a vegetated surface. We can direct a pipe to the rain garden, but its outlet must be at the same height of the spillway, and directing downspouts to the surface through a swale is preferred. So we'd rather have water come over the land through a swale than be directed directly to the garden through a pipe. But if you do choose to move forward with a pipe, whether it's going under a pathway or for some other reason we choose to do a pipe, it's really important to have a Y bypass installed. You can see that in the top picture, what that looks like. Basically, the water will drain in from the downspout and it'll go into the pipe, but this is mainly to protect from freeze damage. So if water in the pipe freezes, then that frozen water can travel all the way up the downspout and really mess up the gutters. So this just creates an air gap that allows for, that protects the gutters and the downspouts. It should be installed facing down versus facing up is a lot more of like a clean out type system. But again, anything is better than nothing with this. And we encourage using the smooth white PVC pipe versus the corrugated black pipe because the black pipe it's a little bit more flimsy and it slows the flow with all of the corrugations, and that can also hold water, which can allow mosquitoes to grow. Occasionally we move forward with pop-ups in designs. So basically that just has the water going through the pipe, and then once it reaches a certain amount of velocity and speed, it'll pop up through the bottom. When we use a pop-up, we always have to install a filter box, which you can see on the left here. This basically has a fine mesh strainer in it that catches all of the debris, all of the pollen and the leaves and stuff that get washed down the gutters. And it keeps it from getting into the pipe below because we need to have fast flowing water for the pop-up to work. Honestly, these filter boxes are great, and I would consider installing them for most of our projects with underground pipes. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about rain gardens having to be sized based on the amount of square footage that drains into them. And this is a little bit complicated, but we're going to try and dive into it. If you have any questions about this, Google's really good. Look at the CBOP, Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professional website. They have stuff on this. Our website at rainscapes.org has more information on this. or just reach out to a trusted professional. They'll be able to explain it to you. But I'm going to teach you how to read this little chart we have, which is it's in a lot of our materials. So I want you to start at the top here. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but on the top here, there is the drainage area in square feet. So say you have 500 square feet of roof draining into what you want to drain into a rain garden. What will happen is these little squares in here represent the amount of rainfall falling onto that roof. So this box down here, the 0.4 would mean 0.4 inches of rain is happening during one rain event. Down at the bottom, you can see we have 2.3 highlighted in red. That means that there's 2.3 inches of rain falling onto that 500 square foot roof. That's creating a lot of water, right? That's creating a volume that has to go somewhere. And so what we're doing is we're going to use that 500 square feet drainage area, go all the way down to the amount of rain that we want to fall, which for rainscapes, we want it to be between 1.2, but ideally closer to 2.3, because as the climate changes, we get more intense storms here in the DC area. So 2.3 is highlighted here. Then what you'll do is once you get to the box, you'll go left to this column, which says media footprints, or this axis rather, that says media footprints. The 2.3 correlates with 100 square feet. That means that in order for a 500 square foot roof to catch 2.3 inches of rain, you need a 100 square foot rain garden planting area to catch all of that water and to have it not overflow. So basically, you would have 100 square foot of that the ponding area in a rain garden to be able to catch the amount of rain that we're looking for. And you can do this with any sort of variation. So like maybe there's 300 square feet of roof. We can go down to 2.4, very aggressive. You need a 60 square foot rain garden ponding area to meet the requirements of the Rainscapes program. And around that ponding area, there is going to be a transitional zone where the slope kind of goes up a little bit, and then there'll be a berm on the outside of that. So the rain garden is going to be larger than what this says here, but that's how you read this chart. That's how we would, these are the size requirements that we would expect. And now I'm going to pass it over to Kathy to talk about conservation landscape placement.
Now that we discussed placing rain gardens and some of their limitations and restrictions and requirements, we're going to talk about siting a conservation landscape, which has a lot more flexibility and can adapt to multiple places on a property. So this photo, again, showing us an aerial image of the house and property that we used for the rain gardens. And you can see that the majority of the backyard is highlighted in yellow, meaning it's eligible for conservation landscape. And this is one of the reasons that this is our most popular type of installation and had such high numbers in the beginning of this presentation when we were looking at how many different Rainscapes types of projects have been installed. A conservation landscape can go pretty much anywhere that is intercepting runoff from an impervious surface, and that impervious surface can be on a client's property or on a neighboring property going into their property. It also must replace eroded soils, invasive plants, or turf. So if there's an existing garden bed that they just want to add on to, that's fine. But unless there's a lot of invasive plants coming out of the pre-existing garden bed that are going to be replaced with natives, then not all that square footage would be eligible. Here is an example of some things we can talk about for placing a conservation landscape, which when we say conservation landscape, we're talking about using native plants and having stormwater move through this part of the garden. So we're basing this on natural ecosystems that we would see in our area. Sometimes that could be a sunny meadow, it could be a shady glade. There are certainly plants that we can use for both. So some people think only if they have a sunny meadow type of situation could they plant. Nope, lots of options for shaded areas as well. Most of our floodplains in Maryland tend to be forested. So there's a lot of different examples that we can use as like a template. We're kind of mimicking what we see in nature. So this layered approach of if it's a sunny open meadow, you might have large swaths of one type of species, like this is Echinacea and goldenrod that you see in the lower left, or in the top right, you might have a higher mixture of plants all competing for light within those shady conditions. And as you can see, there's a lot of hardy ground covers in the photo on the right. There's ferns and pachyra and some um, trees and shrubs as well. It can be a foundation planting. However, water must be moving to that part of the planting. So if there's not a downspout or some other sort of water source going to all parts of the planting around a foundation, then only sections of it might be eligible. And the sections that are receiving water, we want them to be large enough to actually be able to spread the water out and let it soak in. Now that we were talking a little bit about placement, there's some other practices that can be installed with conservation landscaping that differ from traditional landscapes. One of those is landscape fabric. This photo on the left is showing the topography of this front yard, and as you can see, it is fairly sloped to the top left corner of the property, and there's water coming from the back of the property along the side and going out to the street. The photo on the right shows us what this looks like on the ground, very sloped, and as you can see, the downspout comes out and there's drainage leading away from the house, and there is quite a large area here with dark mulch on it. And when we look a little bit closer, we can see that there's black landscaping fabric underneath all of that mulched area and very few plants. So the way conservation landscape differs is we would definitely not use landscape fabric. And this entire area that's mulched would have a higher density of plants to help that water soak into the hillside prior to just running straight off into the neighbors. But landscaping fabric, although it can help with weed competition, we prefer using a high density of plants. Over time, as silt and soil can mix into the pores of landscape fabric, basically making it impede water infiltration into the soil. It can also cause soil temperatures to rise in the summer, and it affects the soil to atmosphere gas exchange, so it is not healthy for the soil and ultimately the roots of the plants. Another thing that we see often is trenched edges in traditional landscapes to help keep the mulch into the garden bed and to help keep maintenance easier between the mulch and like the grass edge. But a trench edge will collect water that's running off of a surface, and basically it's a small swale and it creates a trench, and it doesn't allow the water to enter the actual garden bed. So if this is around a conservation landscape, it defeats the purpose of letting the water flow into the garden bed and letting it spread out and soak in. Instead, it channels it away from that garden bed. So no trenching and no landscape fabric. And we also don't want to mound the bed too high, because that way, if it's next to pavement or a patio or walkway and water's flowing off of that, if it's a mounded surface, it's not going to enter into that area. It's going to flow off into the edges, so back into that trench or back onto the impervious surface. So no mounding, no landscape fabric, no trenching. What we do want to do is have some sort of ponding conservation landscape when we can. So this example in the top right is a recessed bed, and you can see that it's going to capture the runoff from the downspout that's on the corner of the house that goes into a dry creek bed with river rock and then into this little area. This is different than a rain garden because rather than tilling down very deep, it's only tilled down and decompacted about 9 inches deep, and we're only expecting 1 to 3 inches of ponding water just to give water a little bit more of a space and time to soak in before it would leave and then go to that grass that's surrounding the bed. Another practice that we use often in conservation landscaping to help slow down water are berms. So berms can be placed even if there is a slight slope to the property. It doesn't need to be as sloped as you see in this top right photo of a hillside with berms on it. The more sloped the property, the closer together you should have the berms. So at the higher end of the slope, you want to have the berms fairly close together, and as the slope gets towards the bottom and it's not as steep, you can widen the distance between the berms. These some people refer to as microberms. They're not very large. They're only about 3 inches high, and they're a foot to a foot and a half wide. And the idea is to catch the water on the berm. They're like speed bumps. It'll slow down. It'll pond a little bit behind the berm, giving it a chance to soak in. So it's also really great to do these around the root base of either trees or shrubs that can handle that type of water during a storm. Eventually, if it's a really heavy storm, it may pool and then overflow over the berm. And so typically you can see an area where the water wants to do that naturally. And on this hillside, you can see that they reinforce that area with river rock and stone. And that's a good practice to do. So this way the water will pool behind the berm, but it always has a way to leave rather than just breaking through the berm wherever it might on its own. A bioswale is another practice that we use, and this is to help convey water through a property when there isn't as much opportunity to spread it out into a wider conservation landscape. These can also be used as part of a treatment train. In the top right photo, you see a sandy patio type of area, and these particular people were receiving water from their neighbor, and it was washing away some of that sand, but they also wanted to keep their grass area clear and usable. So the option here is to do a bioswale that is at least 50% planted in order to count and be eligible for rainscapes. This narrows the area where the water is going. There's still plant material to help soak it up. It is slowing it down so that it has an opportunity to soak, particularly into those areas. You might be able to put a little bit of a berm around the edge where you don't want it to overflow. But this is giving water a lot more opportunity to soak into the property prior to also being conveyed out to the property or potentially out to a rain garden or a conservation landscape where there's more space. The bottom picture shows another example of berms and check dams. So basically a check dam is another type of berm and they're more reinforced. So this is going to be river rock stone. And this is again just slowing the water as it goes down the slope. And the part that's reinforced with river rock is much wider of an area so that we don't see what we saw in the beginning video slide where everything was just high velocity and pouring right through the side of that yard, right out to the front. So these different practices that we just discussed, the berms, bioswales, and check dams can all be used in combination with each other, along with the recessed beds, to really slow down water, spread it out, and give it a chance to soak in conservation landscapes. So these are some of the little tools and best practices that can be implemented in conservation landscapes, making them highly adaptable and flexible to a lot of different situations that homeowners might encounter. Next, we'll go talk about planting plans and plant lists.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about planting guidance for stormwater flow. So, how to think about plants and how they interact with these rain gardens and conservation landscapes and green infrastructure methods that we've been talking about so far. So, as a lot of contractors know and designers know, right at the beginning of the process, when you're starting, the planting design is very overwhelming. There's so many different things you have to think about. You have to think about soil conditions and how much water something's going to get and how much light something's going to get and deer pressure and what's available in the nursery and what the client wants and how hard it is to maintain different things. And there's just so many things that are all bouncing around in your brain when you're thinking about this. And so when you add green infrastructure on top of that, that's just another layer. So what Rainscapes has done is we've distilled down a list of important things to think about. Of course, this doesn't negate everything else, but these are things you want to think about with green infrastructure plantings. So I'm just going to walk through this list. First would be thinking about the velocity of water flow. So a lot of these projects are going to have like dry creek beds that kind of concentrate water, or they're going to have flow in certain places and not flow in other places. And so certain types of plants like sedges or lobelia or pachyra do really well in areas that are constantly bombarded with water. Like imagine being on the edge of a stream there's water that's always flowing, and it's really it's beating on these plants. And some plants like it, and some plants really don't like it. So that's something to think about, depending on the location of where things are being planted. In the same vein, in rain gardens, like on the picture on the right, you can see that it is fully inundated. That type of water can kill some plants, but other plants really need it to survive. So thinking about ponding and inundation and how much water a place is seeing is something to think about. Salt tolerance. If there is a road or a sidewalk or a driveway nearby that regularly gets salted in the winter to prevent ice from forming as a safety precaution, when it melts, that salt washes right into the landscape. And certain plants are not salt tolerant. That can kill a plant, or it can really, really harm the health of a plant. Deer resistance. In Montgomery County, I would really err on everything we put in the ground being deer resistant because there's so many deer in this part of the country. Um, they're just everywhere. And they have a tendency to eat lots of different things. So deer resistance is definitely a must. Similar to salt tolerance, pollution tolerance. Where is the water coming from that's washing into this conservation landscape or rain garden? Is it a driveway or a parking lot, which would have a lot more pollution than maybe just a roof? Sun exposure, pretty given. Even just within a site, we can range wildly from full sun to full shade to part of both. The slope, certain species are really good at establishing roots very quickly and spreading. They're aggressive colonizers, and on a slope that's exposed, that's really useful because having an open, unvegetated slope is very easy to erode away, and we want something to cover that and establish as quick as possible. Moisture zones in a rain garden, again, there's places that have full inundation, there's places that have partial inundation, and there's places around the berm or on the outside which maybe don't ever really see inundation and might be quite dry. So it's important to think about these different zones when we're choosing plants. And looking at these different species, we can kind of look at some plants that have very high water tolerance. The packer, like I said earlier, switchgrasses, Casmantium, your Juncus. These are all really tough. They're patch forming. They form really, really, they're tough. These are your sturdy plants. Quickly followed by these, which do very well in fluctuating conditions. So these are your rain garden plants that do well in the base. They can handle the inundation for periods of time. But at the same time, when it doesn't rain for a couple weeks or even a month, these guys, once they're established, will be okay with that drought as well. They can handle the really wet and the really dry. So things like, again, the Casmantium, really got to keep an eye on that one. It can really get aggressive. Monarda, Joe Pye, certain Carrick species. These are your tough plants. And oftentimes you'll see a lot of these plants that thrive in this condition are natives because they have been evolving for thousands of years in this region. They're used to the super wet. They're used to the super dry. They can adapt between the two. They're used to the really hot summers that we have here. They're used to the very cold winters that we have. And so they're the ones that are going to thrive or at least survive in these types of environments. Cultivars. Um, a lot of the projects that we work on in Rainscapes are suburban based, right? They're in neighborhoods and they're in front yards. And a lot of these native species that we have, like Joe Pye weed, like some Monarda species, they can get really tall. They can get 4, 5, even 6 feet tall. And that's really not something that we look for in a suburban landscape, even just in any sort of residential landscape. That's not something we look for. It can be overwhelming. They're out of scale, they're out of proportion, and they can even be safety hazards depending on where you are because you can't see behind them. So we really encourage the use of these smaller cultivars. Rainscapes does allow cultivars in our plantings, and we really encourage it. Of course, cultivars within reason. We do have to keep things at 75% native, but we do count nativars and into that description. If there's any question, just work with the planner who you've been corresponding with. But these smaller cultivars you can find them for most of the native species that we would use in a landscape. And they're very useful in keeping things in scale, keeping sight lines open, they're a really great tool to have in the toolbox. And just thinking about planting design, it makes sense to have these smaller species, right? We want to have as much coverage as we can because all of the root material and all of the stems and the leaves and just all of the vegetation material, when water passes through it, that's what slows it down. That's the stuff that keeps it just there for just half a second and allows it to soak into the ground. It catches the materials and the debris that are washing away with it. So it's important to have as much coverage as possible. And when thinking about a landscape that people are experiencing and enjoying, having small things up front, like ground covers and miniature plants, followed by the mid-sized perennials and the smaller shrubs, followed by the taller shrubs in the back. That's the natural order. We want to create these vertical layers that allow for legibility for people who are experiencing it, right? It's comfortable having the small things up close versus if we planted the tall shrubs really next to the walkway, they would crowd you out. It would be very uncomfortable and unwelcoming. It's important to think about this order, and having tall things in the back is also a privacy mechanism. It's great to keep things private. Really, when you're starting up with a process, starting with a planting design process, it can be very overwhelming, as we've earlier said. But I think some of the best places to look for inspiration is the world around us and nature. So looking at communities that already exist out in the world is really helpful, and then you can recreate those communities in similar spaces. So, for example, if there's a yard or a project you're working on that is essentially an upland meadow, right? It's up at the top of a hill, it's dry, it's full sun. Look around into nature around us and see what's already thriving in that environment, because they'll probably also thrive in the yard. If it's a more shady spot, go look in the woods and see what's already thriving there. Now, our landscape in the DC area is so disturbed that it's kind of hard to find some of these natural equivalents sometimes, but there are still good reserves and parks around that have these communities that you can look to. So I'd really encourage you to check out some local places. I have just a couple off the top of my head. I can think of in Montgomery County, there's Glenstone, there's Brookside Gardens, Little Bennett Park, further out in the county. And then even Great Falls these are all great, larger natural areas that have different communities and lots of native plants that are still thriving there. So I didn't need to tell you to go out and enjoy nature, but go and look and see what you can find. Take notes, look to the world around you for inspiration. And so let's think specifically about rain gardens. There are, as I had kind of alluded to, there's different regions in a rain garden that have to be treated differently. So in the center of a rain garden where it ponds quite a bit, that's going to need different species than something like the transition zone around the edge. In the middle, we'll need facultative wetland species, or species that are usually found in a wetland. On the edge, where it gets partially inundated for periods of time, but not as much, maybe a facultative upland species, something that is usually found kind of on the hillside, but can also be found in the wetlands. And then on the berm and around the edge, where it doesn't pond, things like an upland species would work best. This picture is from a book of templates, or rain garden templates that Rainscapes has created. But Kathy will talk later about all the resources that are available to you on our website, rainscapes.org. And here's a really cool video that I'll show you that looks at just rain gardens over time. Like in the summer here, we have strong storms that'll drop water, and they hold water for quite a bit in the center. You can see the water sticks around for longer there than it does around the edge. And so plants in the middle need to be accustomed to that, and they need to be able to survive such, I'm going to play it again. They need to be able to survive such an environment where that water is standing. You can even see around the outside. It stood for just a second, but then it drains away. It's a really cool video. So thinking about those different types of environments and what works where. So in the lower part of a rain garden that sees that ponding, Certain native species like the pachyra, the penstemon, certain milkweeds will do okay there, where they can have water standing on them for 7 hours, or for several hours, not 7 hours. Then around the edge, these guys need drainage. Your liatris and your phlox absolutely need to have good drainage. They cannot stand wet roots. They don't like wet feet at all. They would not survive in the center of a rain garden. And certain things that work in shade, you've got your ferns and your carex, they do very well in shade. And I guess some sedums also work in the shade. And now Kathy will talk a little bit about resources that are available to you on our website.
Okay, now we're going to talk about Rainscape's resources and events that we have coming up. If you go to our website, one of the first things you'll see is whether or not we are currently accepting applications, as shown in this graphic that's taken right from the website. You can also apply by going under the review or application process and then apply. Once you click on that link, what you'll see next is the web page that is shown here on the left, takes you through a checklist, and then there's a part for submit a project application. And under find your property tax ID, you can see a link for the Rainscapes rewards portal. And once you click on that, it will bring you to this portal page. You do the red apply here, let us know what type of practice you're interested in installing, your location, and other information. And you can check any of the requirements again, just through the links on the right, and estimate more or less if you know the exact square footage. There's a rebate calculator as well. We are always trying to improve and be as inclusive as possible. So we have a lot of our resources in multiple languages. You may not easily be able to find them all on the website right now. We had a new website design not that long ago, and we're still working on getting these resources loaded back onto the website where you can easily reach them and organized. But you can always contact one of us if you want any of the application steps or materials in Spanish, Amharic, Chinese, French, Korean, or Vietnamese. We have multiple different resources on the website. Once you are on rain gardens or conservation landscape, any of those web pages, you can scroll down to the bottom and you'll see what you see here on this slide. There'll be a project gallery where you can link to get ideas and inspiration and see how other projects have looked. And there's this whole list of links that take you to these different resources that we've been talking about so far, like the blank plant list calc and the plant calculator and the spacing guide. Here's again just what some of the resources look like. So we have complete planting design templates for rain gardens and for conservation landscape. And there's that example of the planting plan that we showed earlier that you can download with the plant spacing guide. And then these are resources we put together primarily for do-it-yourselfers, but they're super useful for contractors as well. They can also be useful to talk through with your client what you might be installing, how it's going to be your rainscapes, or look at some of the planting plans and get an idea of the species that they like or what they think. So these can be really useful for the do-it-yourselfer as well as the contractor, and we highly encourage you to look through them. Some of them go into a lot of detail, giving you alternative species and plans for sunny meadows or a shaded area. There's multiple different type of templates that you can pull from. And then, oh, sorry, I forgot about this slide too. We'll show you a rain garden. There's illustrations in there, like the one you see to the top right, showing a side view of how a rain garden functions. These are really great for explaining to clients as well how a rain garden might work. So really useful resources. Please check them out. Lots of different plant lists, shady gardens, sunny gardens, deer resistant. We know that's important. So please check out all of our plant lists as well. And again, you could take these with you and get an idea if a client likes some of these species because we've provided photos. And then there's some really in-depth resources. This is what I was thinking of earlier. We haven't discussed permeable pavement a lot, but these are technical design manuals that really go into the details of installation. So for the rain gardens or bioretention, these are really great resources and um, super helpful to look over, especially if you're new at this. Here's just some different websites that you can go to for looking for native plants. I think I also mentioned there's Wheaton Regional Park, there's Little Bennett Regional Park. You could walk along Sligo Creek Parkway, or there's, Rock Creek Parkway. There's any number of places to go where you can try to catch glimpses of native species that have been left in their original plant communities. But you can also look for native plants through these resources too, online. I just wanted to throw in a few other resources that can be helpful. There's always University of Maryland Extension. Check out their resources. They do a lot for native plants as well. We find that when there's do-it-yourselfers, they go to this a lot. So if your client's interested in this, they might find some of this information helpful to look through as well. Rutgers, the landscape plants rated by deer resistance, great little resource to go check. I take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes what deer are interested in one area may not be the same for another, and this research is out of Rutgers in New Jersey. But overall, it's a good place to start, at least, to take a few looks and see, what plants meet the low, or at least at the lowest criteria or the highest criteria, and then there's some variation in between. Mount Cuba Research Center is also another great resources. So they have a wonderful website. They're always doing research on species of interest in the horticulture community. So these are some of their reports where they've done multi-year trials on these different species, and they go through and name cultivars, which ones grew better and which conditions, but also which ones are better for pollinators. Um, just a lot of great research. So great for the ecosystem benefits and also the aesthetics horticultural aspect. So check out their research for sure. They also do a lot of online classes. And stay informed. If you are at this training, you most likely are already getting our Rainscapes Gazette for landscape professionals. But if you aren't, go to the website, please sign up. We don't send out that many different news blasts or things like that. We try to keep it relatively low, and you'll get the Gazette quarterly, but it just is a great way to stay in the know of a lot of different professional development opportunities from other divisions as well. And at the end of this training, this is how you get on our landscapes professional list. We list people on this list where at least one employee has taken the training, and they are listed just ranked by the number of Rainscapes installed. We are not allowed to, so this list isn't in any type of way trying to promote one company over another. We just found that would be the easiest way to list. If you have any other questions, we have a great frequently asked questions page. Again, please check through it and then contact us if one of your questions are not answered. You might read and get a lot of general information, but still have questions on how it applies to your particular unique site conditions. So that's totally fine to call us for that type of specification. Lastly, like I said, contact us. Here are our emails, and this is the Rainscapes team. There's our Rainscapes manager and English, and then we have multiple planners, Dan, Paul, Matt, who you've met here today as well, myself, and Krista, who is helpful behind the scenes, always keeping us organized. So feel free to reach out to us or the general Rainscapes at Montgomery County, Maryland address. And you can email us with any questions or check out the website. Thank you for coming today. We look forward to seeing awesome plans and plant lists coming our way and to work together and continuing to transform more Montgomery County into stormwater protection and helpful landscapes. Thank you.